We've done as asked. Let us go and give word of it.
Set out from here and we'll be on the path to Grand Sorin.
Shall we search the area?
With that, give up now. They shall soon.
Most this is kind of filler text. Okay, so this is the thing about pawns I was talking about. Out of the 3 pawns you have, the 3 NPC companions you have, there is one which is your main pawn, and you can customize your main pawn, as you can see. And the different thing is that if your other pawns die, or rather get knocked out, they can actually die. If you don't revive them in a certain amount of time, they will disappear. Your main pawn, however, will pretty much, I mean, he can also disappear, but he can be retaken at a nearby stone. I forget what they were called. The stone I just interacted with is the place where you get these. But yeah, your main companion can be revived exactly as he was, with very little drawback. Also, your main companion is a lot more, I don't want to say customizable, but you have a lot more control over your main pawn, rather. More so than the generic other pawns. Also, your main pawn does level with you, or rather has its own level, whereas the generic pawns do not level on their own, and so every 2 or 3 levels you'll need to go to one of these stones to pick up new generic pawns, because your old ones will be too weak at this point. Now, I am trying to type the name in with the controller, but it's not letting me, so I guess I have to use the keyboard. I haven't really given it any thought, so let's go with something super generic. I think she also probably has the same moniker. Let's see. Well, kind of. Let's just go with that. The moniker doesn't really matter. I am also going to try to keep this customization short. Might just go with default one. Some of these are pretty ugly. So in the background you'll also see some of the armors that you can get in the game. None of these are really high-end armors, they're more like generic crappy sets, except this one, which is still kind of a generic crappy set, but it's less so than the other ones. I honestly haven't given it any thought as to what she's gonna be even. So remember when I mentioned that if you want to power game, your main character should be either a fighter or a mage? The same goes for your pawn. So the way it works is, if you want to power game or play on hard mode, or you are just in NG+, and yes, this game has New Game Plus, you kind of want your main character to either be a fighter tank, so not a two-handed fighter, but rather a fighter with a sword and shield, and your main pawn to be a mage, or vice versa. Your main pawn has to be a tank, and your main character can be a mage. That is because the tank and healer roles in this game are pretty much indispensable. It's very hard to play without them, and they are very powerful on their own. Like, the tank does a bunch of damage, and the healer does a lot of support other than healing. So if you want to power game, you must go with those two combinations. I'm not gonna try to power game here, but just letting you know in case you want to. Now, most of my other main pawns have been fighters, so I'm wondering if I want to make her a fighter again. I think I might go with the mage. I mean, she has fighter armor, but she looks pretty good for a mage. Now, this height and weight stuff might seem very arbitrary to you, but this actually matters, because depending on your height and weight, it will give you a different carry capacity. So in terms of mage, this little girl will be fine for a mage, even though she would have very low carry capacity. But I think I'll just go with this one. Whoa, some of these voices are very high-pitched. That's fine, I think. Right, so now we get to inclination. So your main pawn is also special because you can kind of shape the way she reacts and treats various situations. Now, from my experience, this hasn't had too much of an impact on the game. The only thing you can kind of tell her to be more that really matters is a guardian or a scavenger, and you don't even see the scavenger in this list, but you can basically make her take more aggro or pick up more items, and those are the only ones I found useful. You can probably do a bunch more things, but they just don't seem useful. It's a lot of hassle later on because you have to sit down with your pawn and tell them, oh, I want you to do this and this and this and this, and they will ask you a bunch of questions, and it's a huge hassle. So since she will be a mage, let's go with quick thinking. Let's have her go for reinforcements, I guess. This is just... I don't know, maybe? Very weird questions. I mean, I don't know. Let's go with this. Probably overthinking it. Again, those don't really matter unless you want to tell your pawn to be a tank. And honestly, even without those, like without customization to tell her to be more of a tank, she will usually be a pretty proficient tank, provided
is sworn to you, Arisen.
Right, provided
From
that
this day,
you
the Legion's men called pawns live and die by
that you
your
equip her as a
command.
tank and spec her as a tank.
I've learned a
Right, so can we get some pawns straight up? Yeah. Okay. So the way this works, let me just skip those. The way this works, a couple of random pawns which are kind of around your level and kind of suitable for you will appear here. And you can filter this stuff out by using this stone here. You can search and filter them by different things. You can set a level, so at your level, they will not cost you anything. If you want to recruit pawns which are higher level than you, it'll cost you rift crystals, or I think that's what they were called anyway. It'll cost you rift crystals, and those are somewhat hard to come by early on in the game. Later on in the game, they become kind of a main currency, but early on they're hard to get. So potentially, if you had a huge amount of rift crystals, or if you cheated in your rift crystals, whatever, you could recruit a level 100 pawn from the start of the game. the game allows you to do so. But chances are, unless you cheated, you probably don't have this much RC. And it kind of ruins the game. Now, there is also the option to get pawns from other players. So other players can kind of lease out their main pawn to help others. So this is somewhat relevant because, as far as I know, it's cheaper to get another player's high-level pawn than it is to get just a generic one. Also, pawns have a really weird system of giving you advice for encounters they've already done. So let's say you're facing a boss, and the person who owns this pawn already has done this boss with the pawn. So if you get the pawn, temporarily, when you're fighting the boss, the pawn will yell out the boss's weaknesses. So they will say, like, go for the tail or whatever. And there's a couple of tiers of knowledge about certain enemies. They can also be specialized to be more effective against certain enemies. So, generally speaking, a player's main pawn will almost always be better than the generic pawns you can get. So, a level 100 generic pawn will be a lot shittier than a level 100 main pawn of another player. Now, for this Let's Play, I did disable online play though, because first off, it kind of makes the game a lot easier, because again, people's pawns will be more powerful than the generic pawns, and secondly, because I just don't like it. There's a lot of people who have really cool pawns that are very nicely customized, have good armor and stuff, but there's also a lot of people who have really... let's just say I don't like their pawns, okay? But yeah, so we're gonna be doing this only with the generic pawns. So let's turn this back to 4. Your party composition doesn't really matter, especially early game. You should have a tank, and you should have a healer or a mage, and that's about it. So you can filter them down by a lot of conditions, even by gender. Yeah, we're gonna go with female. Now, this might seem sexist, but there are actually things in this game which matter, which differ rather for male and female characters. So you might have noticed my character is female, and my main pawn is also female. Now there's a reason for that, and I'll get to that in a bit. Now the thing you're seeing here, warrior, sorcerer, ranger. These are like the, let's say they're the prestige classes, or rather the classes you'll get later on. So fighter, mage, strider are the base ones. Warrior, sorcerer, ranger are advanced classes. So you can't have them at this level as far as I know, so we'll just turn this off. And let's get, let's say a strider. Now, you do get a lot of information about these. You can check their primary skills, their secondary skills, and well, these it doesn't matter, but these can be a lot. Considering you can have 3 primaries and 3 secondaries, these can be vastly different. They also have randomized looks and randomized armor, so you might find a pawn which has shitter skills but has better generic armor than the rest, which may make it worthwhile. Anyway, enough talking about that. We will be looking for a ranged person, so threefold arrow is an obvious giveaway for a ranged pawn. So we'll take a bunch of these people who have threefold arrow and summon them. So after you select them from there, the random pawns which were generated will just run away, and the ones you selected will appear. Right. I mean, at this point, there's not much of a difference between them, so I'll just choose the one that looks best, I guess.
Yes, Arisen.
Just get this one.
I am honored.
Right, so we have our party of 4. Right.
Ah, Emma, you'll be... Mind you, I can help him.
There's that ominous figure again. As I said, though, the story of this game is not a strong point. Now, this guy, if I remember right, gives you a really annoying kind of challenge, and I'm wondering if there's a way to skip it.
The man of the enlist.
Can I just skip it, like walk away or something? I think I can, yeah. So he basically teaches you how to climb stuff, how to jump around, how to kill enemies, how to grab enemies, how to flank enemies, and all those things. Honestly, at this point in the game, you probably know them. Even though you've only been playing for about, what, 30 minutes? You probably understood the basics. The combat system is not exactly complicated.
I've heard talk of the Arisen. They say you hold dominion over the pawns. I've ordered pawns to take up swords and fight myself. I cannot call them into this world as you do, though. Nor make what manner of man? Well, if the dragon is. Make use of the encampment as you will.
Right, so that is Mercedes. She's not really a main character per se, but she is one of the more important side characters. Oh my. My tent. There we go, the Hydra. So a bunch of these other NPCs will also help you in this fight, so... Yeah, as you might have guessed, just like any other game that has a Hydra, you're supposed to cut off its heads. Yeah, climbing this is a bit tricky. As you might have noticed also, below your health bar there is a stamina bar. That is used for a lot of things, mostly your abilities, but also for climbing. So if I grapple to the Hydra like this, you'll notice my stamina is slowly draining away. And when it drains down to 0, I will fall off. So you cannot stay grappled with something forever, but most of the time you don't need to. Usually you just need like a few seconds to kill off whatever its weak point is. In this case, the weak point is the head, but we just do so little damage to it that it doesn't really matter. Plus, you can attack it from the bottom as well. You don't need to climb on it. So an example of an ability we have right now is this blink strike. Oh. Yeah. Not very impressive when we're exactly next to it, but you can see it draining our stamina right there. So when your stamina runs out, and by that I mean it reaches exactly 0, your character will enter that sort of fatigued state where he just puts his hands on his knees sort of and just breathes for a few seconds, and you can't really do a lot at that time, so you want to avoid dropping your stamina to 0. You kind of want to, you know, use it until it gets low, but not completely drain it. Kaboom. Or rather, it will kaboom. Yeah. Those graphics are a bit dated. But this is a game from 3 years ago, so... Oh, there we go. Someone else got it. The same mark. Very ominous.
I am impressed.
Oh, damned! This your handiwork? For true? Oh, what did the lack of an idol doing here anyway?
Ancient tales of the Arisen are well and good, friend. But make a gift of these heights to the Duke, and you might earn yourself a real title. Arisen.
That's a bit funny because we absolutely look like a peasant, and she's just sitting there with her, you know, knight in shining armor kind of look, and just going, "Oh, you might earn yourself a real title. How about some armor first?" Anyway, this is the point in the game where you can actually do whatever you want. You have this quest to deliver the head to the capital, or to the Duke, rather.
A terrible creature. It's been. She was said to lead the village.
Right. Okay. So at this point, you can do whatever you want, but it is recommended to at least finish the Hydra delivery quest before you do anything, because it kind of takes you to the main hub of the game, and the only hub of the game, really. And from there on, you can completely do what you want. You can follow the main story, you can do some side quests, but if you really want to, you can skip the Hydra's head kind of quest, I think. Okay, so this is another pawn. You can meet pawns, and she got scared of me or something, I don't know. Anyway, I don't think I can recruit her at this point, but you can meet pawns on the roads and while traveling. And that's a good thing, because this world is really huge and sort of empty all the time. So it's good to have, you know, just some random NPCs populating it. Now, the thing about pawns on the road is that they will often have better equipment than pawns in the recruitment place. Again, I forgot what it was called, but they will often have better equipment than the generic pawns. So if you are, you know, willing to travel around the world, you can probably find some better pawns. And this is especially true at higher levels. At this lower level, it really doesn't matter because, again, there's not that much equipment to be had. Oh, and there we go. Vocation rank increase. Now, this is somewhat important. And I will talk more about it when we get to the skill trainer. But the short of it is that certain skills require certain vocation ranks. So you will need to level up to a certain vocation rank to learn like the higher end abilities. And in case you were wondering, yes, you can change your vocation. So if you start out with a class you don't like, you don't have to recreate your character. You can change your vocation and level it up instead. So similar to a few other games which do the class swapping system, let's say like, I don't know, Final Fantasy XIV, you can be a max vocation rank in all vocations. So you can have a character who is good at everything, but obviously you can only have one vocation active at a time.
Expire!